Hello and welcome to this video. And on this video, I'm going to be exploring the common ground and the differences and similarities between martial arts and music. And I've got two incredible guests to help me on this discussion. You can see I have my partner in crime, the incredible Roy Marchbank, with his headphones on. Roy is not only an absolute virtuoso guitarist that has pushed what the guitar's capable to the limits, but he also has a great love of martial arts. Is that correct, Roy?
Yeah, huge love.
So I thought he would be a great guy, but we're also so privileged. I think me and Roy are very excited about this, to have an absolute martial arts legend here with us today, Mr. Ron Hall. Lovely to be with you, Ron.
Hey, Andy, it's great to be on your show, and nice talking to you too, Roy.
So I would rather you introduce yourself than me try and go through all the things you've done, because it's quite incredible. So,
for sure. My name is Ron Hall. I'm an actor, martial artist, film writer, producer, director, fight choreographer of primarily martial art action movies. The movie I'm most known for is my appearance as a character named Cliff in Bloodsport 2. And the movie I'm most infamous for is the movie I wrote, directed, and produced called Vampire Assassin, which the best review I've ever encountered in my life, a guy said that the movie deserves to be on replay in hell. And I just thought, yep, that's me.
So Ron, how did you get into martial arts, and how did you get so good?
Okay. My first encounter with martial arts was when I was a kid. My mother used to send me and my brother to bed about 6 o'clock, and we would usually talk till about 9:30 before we fall asleep. So one night, we heard a lot of noise coming out the living room, and so me and my brother, we crawled out the bed on the floor under the kitchen table, and we were watching my mother and father, and they were watching on something on TV, and we heard all this crashing and screaming and yelling, and it was Bruce Lee in the movie Marla. And I just thought it was the most amazing thing I ever saw. I was just, amazed by it. And so a couple of years later, my friend Herb, his father took us to a double feature called, it was double feature with, Fist and Fury and Angela Mao, Lady Kung Fu. And we went in there, and I was amazed and traumatized at the same time, because it was so violent, but it was so, Bruce Lee's skill and his magnetism just amazed me so much. I was just hooked. The problem was I was going to a school in Washington, D.C. that was between two large project centers, and we lived in kind of like a lower middle class neighborhood, but it was a bunch of houses as opposed to these people lived in government tenements. And I was their target every day. I mean, from the 3rd grade to the 6th grade, I would fight guys every day. The whole class was mobilized against me. After school, they would chase me away from school. My family would get so mad because these kids would come to my house, and they would run in the house, chasing me in the house, because my great grandmother lived with me. So my teachers started to tell me that I should take martial arts. So but also I had no coordination. I was a tiny guy, couldn't play sports. Matter of fact, my coordinated physicality was so horrible that when I was when they used to pick us to be on different people's teams, they used to call me Super Sorry. That was my title. Who's going to pick Super Sorry? So
Good.
a rec center was put up in our neighborhood, and they were teaching karate. And my teacher, Miss Richardson, was like, "Ron Hall, you need to go take karate." And I started taking karate, and it was Muay Kwan. It was a system. It's kind of like a variation of Taekwondo. And I was the worst one out of all my friends. They all were getting blue belts, brown belts, yellow belts, and I was still a white belt. I couldn't do anything. But what happened is it's kind of like anytime you're doing something, if you do it over and over and practice the basics, you will find your footing and develop a foundation, is which I did. So I kept practicing my very basics. And I would say by the time I was like 12 years old, I was getting pretty good. And I was I got so good that when I was at school, I started to fight the guys back because they never fought me one on one. It was always like a group of guys. So it was always a certain amount of guys I could beat until I would encounter the guys who were like 2 or 3 years older than me that stayed back once or twice. And then, I would just run from them and they could never catch me. So that's my indoctrination of how I got into martial arts and martial art movies.
So it was almost like it had to happen, didn't it? You had to get good. That's a negative motivation can often be as important as positive motivation. I've found when it comes to achieving stuff.
Oh yeah, what's the interesting thing is when I started doing movies, I would encounter a lot of these guys and they would be like, "Hey man, you're not coming back to get revenge for what we did to you as a kid." By the time I didn't even worry about it, yeah.
So you've also got a great love of music. If anyone's wondering why I know Ron and his connection to my channel, is Ron has been a fan of my channel right from day one, and I've been chatting to him, not realizing that he'd had this illustrious film career. You're a big fan of jazz, rock, and fusion. How did that come about?
I think my grandmother instilled the love of jazz in me. I can remember being over a house one night and I was asleep on the couch and I heard something on the radio and it was Al Jarreau singing Take Five. And I was mesmerized. I just thought that was just amazing. And, I would always, growing up like in Washington, D.C. was a primarily black city and there's a lot of R&B, but within the music were elements of jazz. Like the Isley Brothers would always have these extended versions of a song that were instrumental and like they would stretch it out a little bit. Earth, Wind and Fire had like a jazz background. So a lot of that was in the R&B music. And I always gravitated toward the instrumental parts. And I think years later, I had an employee. I was a manager at Wendy's and I had an employee and he was playing Jean-Luc Ponty on his seat on his whatever he had cassette deck or whatever. And it was actually the song Renaissance, if you're familiar with that song. And I just fell in love with it. And from that's when I became a real fan. Like I've kind of passively listened to it before that point, but at that point I was like, oh, I'm committed to jazz. And I think the connection with martial arts is that when you're developing your martial arts skills, you're kind of alone a lot. You're developing yourself. And the music is kind of like your company, and it allows you to go into kind of like a spiritual realm in which you're developing your thoughts, you're connecting with your mind and your body, and music is kind of like the perfect company when you're trying to develop those things.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you would practice along to what sort of music would it be that you would practice to?
Oh, like I said, Jean-Luc Ponty, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, but my interest started in the fusion era because, when I was a kid, I couldn't stand black and white movies. I felt they were too old and I felt the same way about music, like stuff that was out of kind of like my time. It didn't resonate with me, but fusion music resonated with me. And like I said, people like, Chick Corea, let's see, Stanley Clark, Jean-Luc Ponty, bands in that era really, got me, listening to music. And I've been an avid fan ever since. And I found so much creative inspiration within music. One significant one is, I'm not a young guy, as you can tell. And
I can't tell what age you are whatsoever looking at you.
Well, I'm not a young guy. And one time, a couple of years ago, I went to a jazz club to see it was Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Stanley Clark, and then Hubert Laws. And I'd seen all of those guys like in the 80s. And this is 40 years later, they were incredible. They were playing acoustic music. They sounded more resonant and more powerful than they were sounding on the electric stuff I heard 40 years ago. And I was like, you know what? If those guys can develop themselves at that age, I can do that as a martial artist. And I find myself amazed that I'm able to, when I train with younger guys, one of the first things the young guys go is, how do you get so fast being your age? Well, I think it's your approach to speed. When you get older, my approach to speed is not all the physical energy that I can muster. It's an understanding of my body, the dynamics, timing, rhythm, and all of these things that are kind of inherent in the listening of music or the even, playing of music.
This is fascinating stuff, and I know that Roy is sat there nodding along to this. I've actually learned quite a lot from Roy since I've known him, and over this summer I've been practicing in a way that Roy told me to, which is rather than just do the exercises, I've been listening and feeling my own body and actually examining what's going on, and I have really been able to attain a lot more speed and fluidity, and I really want to get onto that in this video, because any music student watching this, I think the secret of being able to play fluidly and in control, and of course fast, which is what everyone wants, I'm hoping we can sort of explore what that is, so. But before we get onto that, Ron, so when were you coming up? Were you sort of growing up in the 70s? I gotta be honest, I can't tell how old you are. How old are you, Ron?
I'm 60 years old.
How old?
60.
So yeah. So you were sort of coming up in the 70s. Was there any musicians in your area? Because obviously in Washington there must have been a music scene there. So
oh, sure. There, Donald Byrd and the Blackbirds were very prominent in Washington, D.C. Plus, you had the emergence of go-go music. My father was a friend of Chuck Brown, was a pioneer in go-go music, and my father was best friends with him. They used to play in our basement. They'd get drunk and play, guitar in the basement. So those were profound influences in the Washington, D.C. You had Roberta Flack was Washington, D.C. You had Donny Hathaway, I believe, was D.C. So all of these people, the music, infected you, because when you were a kid living in that area, everybody kept up with music. It was just like wearing clothes. It was just what you did. You and your parents would listen to the same radio stations, talking about the same exact song, singing the same song. So it was kind of like a very communal experience that music was.
Oh, that's fascinating. What didn't Dennis Chambers come out of that scene?
Yeah, I think he's Baltimore or DC.
Oh, it's Baltimore, is it? That's it. Yeah. It's in the UK. You hear all these places, but you don't know where they are. And I have a very difficult time trying to work out where people have come from. It's one of my weaknesses, being a British person. So, Roy, what do you think, listening to this? The aspects of speed and control. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background from martial arts?
Yeah, this might. I'll try and keep this as brief as I possibly can, because it's quite kind of intense. I had a very different experience when I was young. I started playing guitar when I was 3, and both my parents were really into music. But my mother would sing a lot of jazz, a lot of Billie Holiday. She would be like floating around the house different days. So I really heard through her emotion. My first instinct was to pull towards her, because she was always singing. And I remember the first time that I got into something that was playing fast, and it was violins, and it was basically Carol Stallings' organization of notes, if you will, for the Warner Brothers Wile E. Coyote cartoons.
People that know Carl Stalling was one of the composers for
and he was,
and all that, wasn't he?
He was just like incredible. And what I loved about it was there was this huge gap in age between adults and kids, but everybody would laugh at the same thing. So that meant that the music was actually doing the organization of what was happening in the room at that point. And that had a profound effect on me. I was like, how does this work? How does music work? What's it about? So the question then became, how is it organized? And this went on for about seven years. I'd been playing guitar just a little bit, just chords mostly, just try to play basic tunes. And I had this experience with my sister. Well, it's actually my sister that woke me up one night. She said, Roy, there's an egg. This is going to sound a little bit weird, but I was like, okay, yeah, well, what do you mean an egg? Chicken, you know. Put the light off, and the bottom of the bed, there was this 3 foot tall egg shape that had been cut out in the pitch black. We're in the middle of Scotland, in the middle of the sticks, so there was no, there was no lights outside, no cars or anything. And as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, when the light went away, it was like someone had just got a Stanley blade and cut this perfect shape of an egg. It was 3 foot tall, and it inched its way to the side of the bed, and inside was glowing white. And of course, I'm going through my head, what can this be? As a child, I'm thinking, what is this? What is this? And my sister's getting more scared. And I looked inside, and it was like this swirling pool of molten mother of pearl, kind of had the effect of mercury. You know, when you see mercury, when it gets poured, but it was all contained within this form. It wasn't emanating any light. Of course, at that point, I realized there was something else going on that wasn't normal. Put the light on. And I meditated on that, I think probably for about 7 months, every single day. And you can't speak about it because it's so odd. There's nothing to relate it to. Most people go, oh yeah, when you go and start, you first go on your first bike, or you get your driving license. Everybody's got something to relate it to. But with this, it's its own entity, it's its own thing. So I ended up meditating on this thing for months as a kid, and it kind of separated me from the crowd, and I felt kind of quite isolated in my own head. And so when I got into music, it was a similar meditation. It was like you were by yourself. Ron touched on this earlier on. You're in your own head, your own sound. And I found that this is so similar to the experience I was having with this. So I was instantly drawn to it. And I really got intense into it after I was able to play Big Bill Broonzy's guitar shuffle. That was it. I just knew what I was doing for life. There was no question. So it was a combination of these elements between my mother singing, this experience, and having the experience of being able to play this piece of music all the way through beginning to end, that actually put me in this pursuit, if you will, to try and find what it is that I wanted to say. So yeah, that was the basic, kernel of the start of it.
Well, what about your interest in martial arts? How did that come about? Well,
what I found with music and martial arts is it's very similar. When I first started, again, kind of similar to what Ron was saying, I grew up in a rough area in Castle Douglas in Scotland. And I was fighting every day when I was a kid. It was just every single day. That's all I did was fight and play guitar, fight, play guitar. That was my first 7 years of as soon as I started going to school. And again, Bruce Lee. That was what really kicked it off. And I remember my dad going, you need to watch this. I'm thinking, well, I need to watch what? And he put it on, and it was just, again, that magnetic personality that he had, but it was more than that, wasn't it? It was like there was something else going on there that I didn't understand when I was young, but I was trying to figure out what it was. And it wasn't until later on I got into the philosophy, Chinese philosophy, and applying that to my approach to music. And that really helped level the field, sort my head out, and get my head really into it, really on track. So I could sit sometimes with the guitar 12, 16 hours a day, all day, and do nothing else. And I figured out a system where I could repeat only the things that were causing me problems in my own playing, but I would only hang on to that for like 10 minutes, then move on to another set of problems that I felt was holding me back. And I found through time, through doing that, I was able to keep my concentration at an all high, and 8 hours, 10, 12, whatever the regime was going to be, sometimes 16, as long as I wasn't repeating those same set of problem areas, I was able to go through the day and it would just disappear, like in a blink of eye. So that was my whole life for the next 12 years, from 10 to 22 was basically just that, you know, and trying to find the time to do it, bunking off school sometimes, which wasn't so smart, but yeah.
And Ron, did that the mystical thing that Roy's had the courage to tell
Yeah,
us?
it's a bit odd. Yeah.
It's a very odd. Roy's told me this many a time. This and talking to musicians. As soon as you start talking to musicians, you always get into this area of esoteric and mystical, a connection to something else. That you've gone deeply into kung fu, haven't you? And really,
yeah, sure. I would say that exact same experience happens in martial arts and probably almost all creative endeavors, where we're started with kind of like a form and a structure, and we're trying to. Roy mentioned problem solving. You know, when you're developing a martial art technique, it's like you may know the basic body movements, but then you have to learn the movement in coordination with your own body, then learn how to apply it, then learn how to apply it interacting with someone else. It'd almost be like somebody who played an instrument and then joined a band. Would be the equivalent of somebody who's learning how to fight and becomes a fighter. So these things are very, Bruce Lee really tapped on. I mean, you have to think about the legend of Bruce Lee. Right now, we probably couldn't think of anybody outside of Jesus Christ is probably more influential than Bruce Lee. I mean, Bruce Lee has influenced generations. You take take a picture of him, show it anyone in the world, they probably know exactly who it is, what he stood for, what his legacy was about. And Bruce Lee tapped into something that has its tentacles into a lot of like how we live, how we choose to pursue things, about creativity and development, and all of these things are in martial arts. And I also find that they're often in music. Like I said, when I'm listening to, like, I'll give you a perfect artist. Pat Metheny is somebody I've been listening to consistently. Pat Metheny now is, every time I see Pat Metheny, he gets better. And he gets better in multiple ways. And I'm always impressed. I saw a show with Pat Metheny not too long ago. Pat Metheny played about 3.5 hours straight with a band, who every member of the band took a break except Pat Metheny. And he ended with a 10-minute solo. Like, that is martial arts. Like, that's like, it was just amazing. So that's my connection with music, is that music kind of guides me, inspires me. And, some of the thoughts when I hear, like, that's how I resonated with your show. When I first heard you, I felt the connection between me and you. I said, this guy's like me. Like, that's what attracted me to it, because I could hear what you were saying, and I know how I felt about martial arts and music, and I saw it in your show. And, and from us talking together, we share a lot of things alike. And, I could tell just by how you express yourself.
Well, I went through a period when I was also young, where I got into it. I actually got into Gurdjieff, Uspensky, and I got into all that esoteric, and that is all. It's not sort of a hippified, let's put the joss sticks on and meditate. It was Gurdjieff's very much about work and being focused on the moment and having attention, and so he would have he taught through certain movement, where you would have to do circles at different rates and be aware of, so I was very influenced by that sort of approach, and I read a lot of books on meditation, and I came to the conclusion that I was terrible at meditating, because my meditation was music. I could go into a room and play for 3 or 4, 5 hours straight. And the time, it's a lot of people find it hard to practice. I especially when I was younger, I would have to try and stop practicing, because once I was in that zone, I didn't want to leave. I went into a timeless space, and I wonder whether that's the same thing when you're practicing martial arts. How do those movements affect you, where you're trying to gain control in the way that you are? And also, Ron, I'd really like to. I know very little about martial arts. Roy knows a lot more, but you know a hell of a lot. Can you really explain more the importance of Bruce Lee in bringing? Did he bring something to the West? Is that what you think?
I think Bruce Lee took from the West. Like if you look at Bruce Lee was born in America, but he was raised in Hong Kong before he came back to America. So Bruce Lee's approach to martial arts will be, you have to think about the period before Bruce Lee. The period before Bruce Lee, people had their own distinct styles. They believed that this was the way to martial art enlightenment. You know, I'm a karate man, I'm a kung fu man, I'm a judo man, and this is the way. And my style is superior. And Bruce Lee, through his American sensibility of like amalgamation, combining elements that are disparate, not connected. Bruce Lee found ways to take something from this, something from that, something from this, and put it all together and almost free himself of all of that. Meaning he had a style that was personal to him, even though people went to name it something else later, but it was his own personal way of doing his martial art. He was looking for a freedom, which musicians always talk about, like improvising, like being in this zone when they're playing with somebody, how they interact based on just the interaction, not pre-calculating it in their mind, not thinking about what they're doing. All of these things Bruce Lee implemented in his movies. If you watch his films, you can look at the evolution in 4 movies. You can see Bruce Lee evolve tremendously in terms of the way he fought in Fist of Fury or The Big Boss and the way he fought in Enter the Dragon. That was 2.5-year period, and you can see the evolution. So all of these things, Bruce Lee brought to martial arts. And I will tell you this, the MMA, the entire philosophy of MMA basically was built on a catchphrase that Bruce Lee used to say is, what happens when when you guys fall and get on the ground? That's what the mixed martial art is basically negotiating with that question, because it would always be like, there was always the principle of martial art that I always found quite odd. And people would always go, the street fighter could beat the martial artist, as if the street fighter, somebody who is an untrained wild fighter, could always beat a person who's trained to fight. And you got to remember, martial art has many different aspects, and most people gravitate toward the fighting. But martial arts teach you self-discipline, self-control, goal accomplishment. There are many principles that you get out of martial arts that have nothing to do with fighting. So Bruce Lee was an embodiment of all of that. And 50 years later, his birthday was just the other day, and we are still talking about Bruce Lee almost more than ever. That's the impact that he had on martial arts, martial art movies, culture. If you look at like the Asian relationship with the world, you can literally draw a line and say before Bruce Lee and after. Meaning after Bruce Lee, the West became consumed with things that were Asian. And it's part of our normal cultural experience to do yoga, practice martial arts, eat Asian food. So Bruce Lee really was a revolutionary, and that ties me to the musician that Bruce Lee, I feel he was the most like, Miles Davis. If you take what I just said and apply it to Miles Davis, there are a lot of similarities where Miles Davis was a traditional musician. He was known for, a tradition that he practiced and was educated in, and he wanted to break free of that. He wanted to cross those boundaries, integrate other elements. That's the same thing Bruce Lee did. So Bruce Lee and Miles Davis, they walk kind of like a parallel path. And that's why each of them are so influential within the areas that they're influential in. Yeah.
Oh, and that's absolutely fascinating. And my head's full of too many questions now. Well, there's a thread that's coming out of both what you're saying and what Roy's saying. And it's occurred to me right now. There's a central theme here that ties all these things together. I think as musicians, we always talk about the upbringing. You both started with that. That's how I got into this. Roy said this is how I got into that. And I think for a lot of people, then they hit a brick wall at some point. And I've dealt with this with musicians all my life. You hit a brick wall and you want to be able to progress. And I think this is the central theme. How do you continue to evolve as a person? How do you continue to move forward? And once you're an adult, that's in other words, how do you change? How do you get better? How do you progress? And the answer is through an organized, disciplined approach, which is also linked into the moment and you personally. And I think one of the great things about jazz, and I've tried to argue this, I've spoken to you this about with you about this, Ron, this idea of calling it black music, which I think limits the music form. I think, obviously black musicians have played the central part in the creation of it. But the great gift of jazz is it opens its arms up to everything. It can take everything in.
Right.
It can take everything in and then transform it and move forward. And you're saying that's what Bruce Lee did as well. He was able to take the whole everything and bring it in to move forward. And so I think this idea that Miles Davis was able to do, there's so many musicians that came out, they pioneer something in their early 20s, and then that's it. They do that for the rest of the time. Miles is an anomaly because he progressed all the way through. Pat Metheny has progressed all the way through. He's undoubtedly on another level now. And what I know of Pat Metheny is he keeps a diary in which he is focused and notes everything that happens throughout his day. What he's eaten, how much he slept, where he slept, all these types of things he notes. And then he fine-tunes that. So now he doesn't eat before he plays. So when you saw him play for 3.5 hours, that guy hadn't eaten that day.
Right. You know what's interesting is that is a key element, I think, in that development is taking in your environment, like what's around you specifically to make you that unique person. I'll give an example. You take we have so many amazing guitarists on a single instrument, and they all, the spectrum is wide that people sound nothing alike. Their approach to it, the sound that comes out of it, all of these are different dynamics formed based on who the person is and what the person has experienced or interacted to. And martial arts is the same way. You can have people like, the guys who are doing MMA, they can all study the same exact martial art, but some guys might gravitate to hand techniques. Some guys might gravitate toward kicking techniques. Some guys might gravitate toward moving and evading when they're fighting an opponent. And so all of this is kind of, even as I'm speaking about it, it's almost like a spiritual quest towards some type of, if I had to use a word, like a liberation. It's kind of like you have a foundation and that's necessary to develop. Once you develop, your next goal is, how do I become free of the thing that made me get to this point? And I think that's a thing in many creative endeavors.
There's a fascinating thing about you and Roy, is that you have both pushed these things to the limits. You're both incredibly highly skilled, and in certain ways that worked against both of you as well. I've been researching your career, Rod, and it's quite obvious that you were too good at certain instances. I know you're not going to say it, but it seems quite apparent. I'm watching you in some of your, and the for what I know from the skill level, it's absolutely astonishing what you're doing, and Roy's the same. So I'd like to bring Roy in. What was the process that got you to be able to push your your physical and technical abilities so far out? Can you describe that and see if that resonates with Ron?
I'm going to have to come back to again to Bruce Lee there, because when I picked up and really got into these philosophies and his thinking, the one thing that stuck in my head, and I actually took this from him, and you can see it in the DiMarzio website, is no style as style, no way as way. And I thought that really resonates with me, because I can look at the world and take it in for what it is, which will be changing every single day, as I will be changing every single day. And I can still evolve, because as soon as you start to become one set style, then where are you going to go? Because you're hemmed in. If you're like, say, a karate guy or a kung fu guy or whatever, if you're sticking to that one system, how do you grow? You have to, break them down so you can actually, bring in a bit of jiu-jitsu, bring some, judo, and bring some, whatever, Wing Chun, and bring whatever. And you mold yourself to what feels right for yourself, because no two people are the same. And the one way that I can explain that was probably with my alternate picking. I had to take a bit of the old and then change it to be a bit of the new. So when I adapted what was Sarod, which is probably documented anyway, at least 600 years BC, if not 6,000, back to Mesopotamia and Afghanistan, right? And I looked at the style and the picking style, and I did the lead work, and I went out to Central Asia and I studied and I sat with these guys, and the same picking system still used to this day. But I had to change it a little bit for myself to feel like I fitted into that. And although that was done previous, I realized that this was actually something that's really, really old. So I didn't feel hemmed into playing one particular way. And you get these instructional books that it must be this way, it must be that way. Well, no, it doesn't. You do have to practice it to a point, but you also have to break a little bit free of the classical methods in order for yourself to grow. And I think that, again, this is what Bruce Lee's philosophy was really all about, was showing you how to grow as a musician and think about it, meditate on how you're going to go around about doing it. How are you going to be better tomorrow? Or how can you reflect back on yesterday and say, honestly, have I done anything about myself at this point to make myself a better human being? So that's really what it's shown me. His whole thought process and taking the philosophies, the Chinese philosophies, the positive parts, and applying it to his vision was just, it's to this day, I open up his books and think, okay, I'm a little bit stuck today. What am I going to think about? And I can open any page and it will shine on one part that I haven't really fully integrated to my thought process. And I'll be like, okay, I'm going to start here today. I'm going to start thinking down these lines, So yeah, it's not something you never stop growing. And I say I could live 100 lifetimes and I would just be skimming the surface of whatever it is that music is.
Does that resonate with you, Ron, in terms of your approach?
Sure. You know what? Roy mentioned something, with a quote of Bruce Lee about liberating yourself from the classical. And it's no accident he chose the word classical, because we largely associate classical with music. Classical order, so Bruce Lee was a dancer. He often talked about rhythm and timing, all elements in music.
Cha-cha, yeah.
There is definitely a relationship between music and martial arts. I mean, if you look at the best martial art movies, they have powerful soundtracks that drive the action that you're seeing. And if you remove that, remove the music, the whole fight has a different context. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows the End of the Dragon scene, theme that, by Lalo Schifrin, which was jazz and music on a martial art movie. So all these connections, they're just, and it draws me to another thing that Andy was saying is something that I've been wrestling with for a while. What Andy was talking about was the racial politics of kind of like jazz music. Meaning that, people going, who does it belong to? Where does it come from? And things like that. So in the film industry, when I was entering the film industry, what people were telling me was, well, you can't do that kung fu stuff. You have to do like the John Wayne punch. It has to be slower, and you can't do all these acrobatic things. Now, people were telling me this about 25, 30 years ago. Now everybody's doing it. But back then, people were like, no, Ron, slow down, well, stop, or you can't do this. So in terms of how jazz is related to like Black people, you got to think martial arts comes from China or Asia as we know it, but it also comes from India. Yeah. The connection is that a Buddhist monk went to Asia and started teaching the monks in the temple martial arts, which, it spread it out all over Asia. So now, where was it before India? It just shows it's a connection and a through line through like humanity, is that we're all one human species. Yes, man has found clever ways to divide all of us in all types of subdivisions about how different we are. However, we're very much one thing. So it comes from us. It's labeled, meaning that I'll give an example. It's like, I live in America. And people tell me not to ignore race, but America classifies me as a Black man. I can't go around assuming I'm just any old guy, because that would work against me. So those politics in terms of like jazz about who where it belongs and who's responsible for owning it. It belongs to all of us. And if you talk like you remember you saying about Wynton Marsalis about something, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was very something he agreed. His brother said he would have agreed with you about how jazz is really not owned by African Americans. So yeah, I get it. It's owned by all of us.
It's this idea of integration. I think that there's this idea of cultural appropriation where people will say, "Oh, you've taken that from that culture, you shouldn't do it." I think there's another word for cultural appropriation. It's called peace.
Yeah,
it's basically it's the thing on which we all come together and stop fighting. If they could do some cultural appropriation out in Gaza and Israel at the moment, I think they could sort it out, but they can't because it's just two opposing systems that can't come together. And this is what I found beautiful about jazz. And I mean, the other day, Ron, you were setting me straight because I am a white, middle class Englishman, and you were telling me about your experiences as a black man in America, and I'm going, yeah, totally, I don't know about that. But the thing is that what I want is a world where everyone can open their arms and listen and hear that, and to move forward. So we come back to this idea that to move forward yet again, you need to be able to open yourselves up to new ideas and new things. Since I've been working with Roy, my practice regime has changed. So I used to be very classical, I suppose. I would sit down and I'd have a number of exercises and I'd run through them every single day. And I'd do them the next day and I'd run through them. And that would keep my technique up and going. Over this year, I have actually been sat there with the drumstick and just looking at it and going, how does it bounce? Where's the weight? Which bit of my hand am I holding it in? When I hit it in this way, how does it react? Does it change if I do this? And I have been able to put a large amount of skill. And this is why I was so excited to have this interview with you two. Over the last week, I've been looking at my bass drum pedals. And I'm playing away, and I actually dropped my heels onto the back of the pedal. And when you do that, the pedal goes, and I went, oh, that's weird. I did it again. And I noticed I wasn't practicing and going like to just do the exercise. I noticed that the pedal went. So I dropped my heels on, then I dropped my toes on, and then I took up this motion, and I suddenly went, oh my God, this is the secret of the bass drum pedal. Is it has to be activated, it has to be brought into motion, because so often when you're playing the drums and the guitar, because I play the guitar, I know Roy will agree with me here, we're dealing with circular movements, which is so often we're trying to play through the drums. Anyone who saw my Billy Cobham interview, it was a profound experience, because when I was a kid, I saw an interview with Billy Cobham, and he said that playing the drums should be like having a delicious meal where you just take from here and you'll have a little bit from here. What do I want? Or I want a bit from here. And I can remember not understanding what he was on about, and just to get to the point where I know what he meant. And what he meant was the idea of taking. You take the sound out of the instrument rather than trying to force your way into the instrument. And that these takes are often circular in their motion. So now I'm really trying in this interview to really pare it down to something practical for people to watch, and something that's never said normally in educational things is this idea of taking rather than giving out, and the idea of the circular movement that produces that. And what was incredible in that interview, I finally, after 40 years, could sit down with Billy Cobham and asking about that. And he goes, well, I got it from Muhammad Ali, and that he had worked with Muhammad Ali. And that the idea of the impacts, and he was you could see him doing it in the video, go and pulling back. When I watch you fight, Ron, it's like an explosive amount of force. So it really does feel like you're going to do the other person damage. It seems ever so easy and light, but it seems explosive to me. Your classic scene in Bloodsport 2, it's just so explosive. You don't see that with so many modern martial artists, because they seem to be going through choreographed routines. But you give the impression of power relaxed power. So
Well,
tell us
you know
about
what?
how you attained that, the sort of philosophies behind that.
Okay, so this is something I've always wrestled with in film. Like, for example, my brother would say, like, I wanted to be like the guys I saw in the movie. Like that was my metric for, like, when I first started taking wushu kung fu, like we would go to class and we would sit in a stance for about 2 hours. So our legs would wobble, the teacher would pick us back up. And I would go, this is not like what I saw in the kung fu movie. So that was kind of like what I wanted. But the very fact that I took a hard style quote, which was a Korean karate, and then I took a soft style, which was Chinese Shaolin Wushu, it allowed me to integrate both of those things in my action. So, for example, when I'm fighting someone, the first thing I take into account is what is the person able to do? And there's a thing in Hollywood that's going on right now where they're training a lot of actors. If you notice, like, a lot of A-list actors are all doing martial art variation movies. Tom Cruise, Denzel Washington, Matt Damon, you can name the whole list. Here's the difference that I always specify. The difference is that you can teach someone a move. However, they may not understand what to do once the move comes back. That's a whole different dimension. When you have a person who's skilled in the martial arts, the source of his creativity starts from his skill. That's where it starts. As opposed to, you can take somebody, stick them in a room for 6 months, get the best trainers in the world, and make them look incredible, but they won't embody it. It won't be in everything. So, so for example, when I'm practicing martial arts, what I know is everybody practices martial arts now. It's like, what can I do to impress somebody who knows martial arts? They go, you know what? I may be a martial artist, but I don't know if I can do that. You know, it's like, I don't know if I can. I'm trying to, that's the standard I have for myself. Is like, I'm trying to reach something, and it's like, it's something I'm trying to capture, where I develop a foundation for what I want to do, but then I kind of expand it in the application of it to where there's a spontaneous something that I want to occur. It's like the relationship between me and the person, where the camera is, how I'm moving, how I'm feeling, and all of these things based on the foundation that I know exactly the result I want. I just don't know how to attain it. And like I said, all of these things that are martial art oriented are also, I find, like in music. When you're listening to people, you see, listen, like, you know, some of my favorite artists, you know, Pat Metheny and Miles Davis. They have this thing that they do. You know, you listen to Pat Metheny now, it's like he's doing the stuff he was doing 30, 40 years ago. But man, the colors and the dimension and the depth that he's bringing to the same approach to the music that he had is vastly different. And so that's the thing now, is that I think what I'm trying to do in my martial art is to not be so you know, choreographed, so rehearsed. I want it to be free. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how are you going about doing that? Because I think that's the key. Because I often think with especially with musicians, music students, that they do focus too much on the technical. And of course, the trouble whether you're trying to teach technique is, you know, our hands are all different sizes, different shapes. We have different muscle structures. We have different, you know, emotional states. We have the personal thing we want to say on the instrument. All this, there's too many anomalies for there to be a one size fits all approach. So I always feel that you have to have principles. And there's a wonderful story about the great drum teacher Freddie Studer. And Freddie Studer gave lessons to Greg Bisonet. And I did a couple of clinics with Greg Bisonet, and I said to Greg, what did you get from Freddie Studer? And he said, oh, it was so funny. He said, I go around his house, I sit on the drums. And he said, I start playing, and then Freddie goes, Greg, get out the way, get out the way. So Greg gets off the kit, and then Freddie goes, what are you doing? Carry on playing. So he sits back on the drums, he starts playing, he goes, Greg, get out the way. So he gets back up, and then he goes, sit down, I haven't told you to stop playing. And this thing goes on, and then Greg turns around and goes, Freddie, I don't understand what you're telling me here. And he goes, can't you see? You're in the way. You need to get out the way. And that, for me, has become the central principle And so my fundamental practice routine now is very simple. It's this. If there's the drum, I'm attempting to do this as opposed to this. I want to do this. And I focus on actually letting go at the moment of impact. Oh, and actually trying to feel where the stick wants to go and follow the stick back. I'm trying to now track the stick back. And what I found with the drums is that this action here, fingers tense there, fingers relaxed, that really is fundamental. It's the same thing with the pedal. And oh, I've had a call coming. And so, oh my God, the phone's going off now. Can you hear that? But that is 40 years of playing the drums. That's what I've arrived at. Is this? You know, it's that's loose, and then that's the it's the binary of those two things. Does that resonate with your martial arts approaches? Is there a fundamental principle that you have that overrides, you know, your
one principle that I think I have is there's usefulness for all of it. I think that's part of the development, meaning that, for example, anytime you undergo any type of like training of a skill, you have to learn the rudiments of the skill. And you're confined within that in your understanding of it. But then what happens is you get to a point where you clearly understand it. It becomes becomes subconscious. And then you have to release it. And that releasing of it gives you the ability to kind of transcend it, to use it, to come back to it when you need it, to let go of it when you don't need it, and to do what you were ultimately saying, get out of your own way when you're looking to develop. It's like, oh, I used to kick like this. Like, for example, the Thai kicks. You know, people did like, you know, for years, people were like Taekwondo kicks were like the kicks, or Hapkido kicks were the kicks you're doing. But then the dynamic and the explosiveness of Thai kicks, you know, people had to learn to embrace those because those are just equally as powerful, even though they're using a different dynamic. So, yeah, getting out of your own way, I think, is a part of that process that we have to learn because it's a part of it. We can't take it out of there to get from what we know to what we can become or what we can develop. We're in the way because we're going to start doing this. We're going to inject how we think about it. Oh, I know what moves to do with the drum, with the stick. I know this feel, I know this combination. But then if you're reacting to somebody who you've never played before and he's doing something you're not used to, all of a sudden you just got to let it go. You just got to go and get in the groove, get in the rhythm. So all of these things, I mean, for you to see the connection, like I said, when we first started having this conversation about having this conversation, I was so excited because, like I said, music is a key part of my martial development. Is the listening of music and the influence of music philosophies that I hear from musicians talking about music that I want to apply to martial art.
Roy, what have you got anything to add to this?
Well, the way I suppose I'll try to simply simplify, and again, there's another good Bruce Lee quote, but simply simplifying doesn't necessarily mean it's a simple thing, because you've got to go through the whole process of knowing what works, what doesn't work, and then you have to figure out what's effective, and then from there you have to develop what's more effective for you, and then you're trying to get to the point where you feel that it's effortless. So simply simplifying is a process, and it's like that in every single technique that I've learned, and a way that I got to doing that was forgetting everything that I'd learned. Well, we talked about this before in a previous video, I think, with the guys in the Patreon page. Was to tune the instrument to something you didn't know. So basically, everything that I'd been learned was then thrown, like dust to the wind, and you were just left with the basic tools. So now I've got to create something on an instrument that I really don't know, because I don't know the chord structures, the scales, anywhere, where everything is. It's just a completely alien instrument. But I'm getting back to what something is effective. And what I mean by effective is like what it is that I want to say. So it was difficult for me at first to actually you know, tune the thing and then try and fumble about the data. But then I realized now I'm getting somewhere. Now I'm actually starting to write something that's of me, and I'm not just like herding the cattle into the pen, so to speak, and just, oh, that will do because that's what everybody else likes. I started to actually think for myself and started to build a sound of my own from in self-discovery, from the process of unlearning everything that I'd learned and simplifying things down to its basic component, which was being that effective in each and every single noise, everything meaning something, the meaningfulness in each note, as opposed to just going through the motion. So
what we can practically pull from that is if you're a musician and you feel that you've faltered because you've become stale. One of the things you need to do is realize it's you in the way that is stopping you from moving forward. It's your attitudes and your beliefs and all the morals that you have about how the instrument should be played. It's the shoulds, isn't it? And the way to move out of that is to embrace the unknown and bring an unknown aspect into what you do. Now, there's another aspect of martial arts I'm vaguely aware of that I'm sure there's a phrase I read once which was something like we don't have ears, our five senses are ears. Do you know this, Ron? This idea that you have to be in the moment, and that you are actually using all your senses, not just visual and watching, and that everything is as one. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. While I'm not familiar with the phrase, the concept I'm clearly familiar with, because that's what you do. Like when you got to think of you're fighting, or even if you're playing fighting somebody else in a movie, there's things that are unforeseen and you cannot account for in all of your planning. You just can't do it. You can't account for how hard somebody's going to hit you, how fast they're going to come, where they're going to move. You can have approximations of it. And so when you're in those spaces where you're doing martial art, like let's just say choreography, which is a step down from fighting, pretending to fight, you still have to convince the people who are watching that there's a fight going on, even if it doesn't, and you're playing to an audience as a musician is playing to an audience when he's playing. You're basically trying to elicit a response from your audience. You want them to enjoy it. You want them to appreciate it. If you go into your solos, you want them to take maybe special notice of this complicated arrangements of notes. And all of these things are present in kind of like martial art fighting and martial art, movie fighting. So yeah, I get it. And you, like I said, you said it. I think that key principle that to get out of your own way, releasing. We often hear about things like release yourself, transcend what you think, don't feel it, don't think about it, just be it, just live in the moment. Live, even as I get older now, like when I was younger, I used to be a chronic multitasker, and I'm really learning the benefit of focusing on one thing at a time. Like one thing at a time really helps you do a lot of stuff as opposed to do 20 things and then get none of them accomplished. So these principles, they're just fascinating. And like I said, listening to music as a martial artist, I'm always inspired. When I was 40 years old, I was worried about, oh man, I'm not going to be able to do martial art movies. Had I known I would be this capable 20 years later, my 40s, I would have chilled out a little bit more, because I was thinking I was running out of time. And like I said, when I went to go see Chick Corea and those guys, man, I'm telling you, you had the experience. Those guys were so powerful with acoustic instruments that sound infinitely more powerful than Return to Forever at the height of their volume. It was pretty amazing just to watch it. And they were old guys with gray hair sitting up there jamming and weren't even, there wasn't a lot of like power techniques in the terms of how they were moving. All the movement was very subtle. And yet the music that was coming out of those instruments was incredible. So,
last night, Rick Beato posted up a wonderful video about Frank Gambale. And it was a shot at Nam where he got on stage and he just started playing, and it wasn't his amp, it wasn't his sound, and you could see him sort of shouting to turn this down and do this as he starts playing. But it's incredible because Frank Gambale brings to this experience and knowledge, and you can see he's so relaxed, despite the fact that he's surrounded by some of the best guitarists in the world, and they've all got their phones out, and he has to play, and he seems so relaxed. And you can see the whole guitar world is just shaking their heads at what this guy is doing on the instrument. It's astonishing. And it takes me back to something I was told by my art teacher when I was painting. I can remember I was painting away in the studio. My teacher came up and he was watching me paint. And he said, he goes, every single brush stroke should be made with the attitude that a squirrel would have jumping from one branch to the next. He said, because when the squirrel jumps from one branch to the next, its life depends on it, but it cannot be tense. It has to be just, and you just do it. And that's an incredibly hard thing to achieve. And I think that's what we're trying to get at here, is the ability to do that, which can be described as rolling with the punches, isn't it? It's a fighting metaphor, is that if somebody comes at you and they decide to pick a broom up and they come at you like that, you need to react. I suppose if you're a martial artist, you're going to react without thinking, aren't you? It's going to be, is that right, Ron? I mean, I know nothing about martial arts, but
sure, it's a combination of different elements, but definitely not thinking too much about it is one of those elements. Bringing up Rick Beato points out something that fascinates me, and it's the heart of what we're talking about here. Like, I started listening to him because I used to be listening to you. And what I noticed sometimes is, how Rick has this system of he'll tell the person the note and the chord and all that. And what's fascinating are the musicians' reactions when he's saying that. It's almost as if they're saying to him, hey, Rick, you may be missing the point. It's kind of like Rick saying, let me take this chord over here and you get a flat note here and a blah, blah, blah. And, and I've seen like Sting and Al Di Meola and various people look at Rick Beato go, yeah, no, that's great. You can do all of that. And that's a respectable ability. However, we're talking about music, and it's kind of like the music is the thing. It's like, I don't need to know exactly to be able to, articulate every single movement that I'm doing, because I'm almost doing it like without a conscience. I've developed the skill. It's in my memory. It's within me. So when I want to express it, I just do it. And that's the same thing that you have to do with martial arts, especially when you talk about martial movies.
That reminds me of like the scene in Enter the Dragon when he was like slapping the kid in the back of the head. He's going, it's like a finger pointing to the stars. He says, no, don't look at the finger or you'll miss all the heavenly glory. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is.
This is we're coming up to the hour now, and I know we could keep talking like this, and we would end up with a 2 or 3 hour video, and people wouldn't watch it all. So I love this mix of people. This is a great thing to have Roy and Ron together. That's a fantastic thing, because I know Roy does know his martial art. Ron, before you go, could you just tell us a little bit about what you are actually up to now, what you're doing?
Well, I just did a short film that's winning, multiple awards. It's my first on-screen appearance in probably almost a decade. I've been focusing on writing and learning, producing behind-the-scenes stuff, because I ultimately wanted to come back and do films as a performer, actor. But, I just needed a time to develop myself in a different way so that I can get kind of like what I want closer to the screen. But this film is called Shadow Fist 3. It'll probably be at the Pan-African Film Festival. And if you watch, you can search for it on the internet or social media and you'll find it. I'm working on a documentary where I've been interviewing some of the most famous martial artists in films, from Jeff Speakman, Fred Williamson, Byung Yu, legendary people who all contribute to the martial arts. And what's fascinating is that I'm discovering is that nearly all martial artists can do two things almost to the ability that they do the martial art. Meaning they're great at martial arts and there's something else that's totally unrelated or seemingly unrelated that they're just as good at as they are in their martial arts. And that was an interesting discovery.
No, that's fascinating, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
The way these things do cross over. I think we've only really touched the surface of this subject, but that's wonderful. And if anybody wants to contact you, Ron, what's the best way?
Social media. You can find me Ron Hall, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can just look up Ron Hall Kung Fu Bro, and you'll find me.
The legendary Ron Hall. It's been an honor to have you here, Ron. It really has. With all your experience and stuff that you've done, the life that you've lived, it's wonderful to be able to plug into that.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, Andy. And Roy, you know, I love your music. I can hear all my favorite guys in your playing. And it was great to talk to you about music and martial arts. And, you know, hey, maybe sometime in the future, you know, we'll do it again and take another.
I'll hook you two up as well. So we were, you know, I'll make sure you can chat to each other. And Roy, awesome. Our latest thing is the Law of Three album, which is you're nearly there, isn't it? We've nearly got it done.
Nearly there, Andy. I've got 2 more tracks. Well, not 2 more tracks. I've finished the last epic one. I've just got this massive solo now on the track that you posted me to complete, which is going to be a bit epic in itself because I'm trying to explore the territories of the whole dynamic range thing. So that's going to be present on that track. And I'm going to do the whole thing in one take to just keep it as natural as possible as well. So yeah, that's nearly finished now, which is just, for me, it's like a year's work.
You see, the thing is, Roy is never happy unless he actually is exploring the outer limits of music. If he's just doing he's like Miles Davis, if he's just doing what he's done before, he's not a happy man.
No,
you know, I could go and join a funk band and just play James Brown tracks. I'd be happy. You know, I'd be a happy man. But Roy's always pushing forward, and I think that's the central theme of all of this is the ability to, you know, to move forward. And I think we're all of an age, and we're all finding ways to do that as well, which is very interesting. But it has been a wonderful chat. Thank you for doing this. We'll do another one again. I had a title for this, but now we've done it, I really am going to change what this is all about. I'm going to have to redo the graphics because I've got my thumbnail ready, and it didn't go where I thought at all. And I think, I want to get Bruce Lee in there. I mean, when I was a kid, I was obsessed. Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee, those were my 2 obsessions. I had a T-shirt with Bruce Lee, and I had a T-shirt with Muhammad. For my age group, they were like they were the 2 guys, you know.
What's fascinating is what you just said. It did not go the way you wanted to go, but you really wanted to. But you wanted to have like a dialogue about martial arts and music. You knew that was like your goal. Now the destination, the path to get there is what you didn't account for. So that's kind of like the same exploration that people talk about in music.
Yeah, what it's done is it's raised this issue, which has been a central issue for me. Is say if you've got certain mental health issues, or say you procrastinate, or you're lazy, all these things that we try and deal with, it requires us to change, and it's almost impossible to change, and that's depressing. But there is a way to change. There is a way, and I think that's what this has been about, you know. And that shocked me, you know, because I was like, oh my God, this relates. All of this relates back to correct mental health. You know, it's correct. Of being in balance in yourself. It doesn't matter about the fighting, it doesn't matter about the music. You can stick all that on the side, throw it away. That's just the mechanism for us to feel, you know, fulfilled, and to be fulfilled, you need to be focused to feel like you're moving forward. But so often that is so hard to achieve. That's what got me interested in Gurdjieff when I was younger, because he said, you know, the reason why you can't move forward is because you have all these different personalities, and they have these different moral values and different worldviews, and you need to consolidate yourself into one thing that is moving forward together. You have to have a harmonization of the self, and that's the thing that's coming out of here. I didn't think we were going to talk about that.
But you know what, Andy, one thing I'd like to say is sometimes you may be moving forward and not know it. You know, I just had an experience in my life where, you know, it's kind of like I did this movie that people criticized, and I remember I went on blockbuster.com and they had like it had more reviews than Star Wars. And
this is Vampire Assassin, everybody. I watched it. The whole film's up on YouTube, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. And after I made that movie, I didn't want to stand out in front. So I spent over a decade trying to collaborate with people. And, and often that would run into like mixed results. And it wasn't until I just made a decision to say, you know what, Ron, go do what exactly, and not close, do exactly what you want to do. Then that change came about. But what's fascinating is all the other little things that I did in the meantime, now I can just draw from them in an instant, and they're being, they're assets that I'm using like right now to do this, to do that. So it all matters. It all counts. Sometimes we lose track of that, is that in the path to going somewhere, the road is as important as the beginning of the journey and at the end of the destination. I think that is something that can be applied to any creative endeavor, and maybe not even so much creative endeavor, just doing something. The act of acting or pursuing anything is that the path to get there is significant, and oftentimes we just want the end result.
I think the path itself is wound into the goal. And if you can harmonize the path as being part of the goal, then you feel the excitement of motivation to crack on with it. That is the secret I have learned in life. And when we were chatting the other day, Ron, and then the idea of me scoring the soundtrack to a martial arts film, it's like a dream come true. That would be, what do you think, Roy?
Let's do it.
Be incredible, wouldn't it? So, and it's if we ever get to that point, Ron, me and Roy we're sat here ready to go. We will do the.
I'm gonna hold you to that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, wouldn't it be incredible, Roy? Because I know the way you work and the way you can pull out of improvised material, you can pull out this structure with your chops. Imagine being able to almost like improvise your way through a martial arts soundtrack and be able to create something that really is doing exactly the same thing as what's happening on screen.
Well, one of the most important things for me musically was actually creating music that was able to paint the picture. And when I was a kid, the thing that struck me the most was the fact that a movement that was created by Carol Stalin was like created in such a manner with music that it didn't require dialect. It didn't require anyone explaining, because the music was doing all the explaining for it. It was done so perfectly. So that was installed in me from a very young age. So that became something that was really important for me to try to understand. And at present day, that's what I'm trying to do all the time.
Tom and Jerry, they're the greatest fight scenes of all time, aren't they? Ron, you're good, but you're not as good as Tom and Jerry.
I know that. Yeah,
that's what we all do. I can remember watching Tom and Jerry, and I was watching Tom and Jerry once, and I thought, is this the greatest artistic achievement of humans? It's so great, and it's so wonderful. It's got so much truth. And yet you could appreciate it when you're like 4 years old. I've always felt that those cartoons were so high in terms of what they were doing. Incredible.
Really.
Right, we'll definitely finish up there. But I'm glad we had that little extra chat. I feel it's tied it up now. I do feel like awesome. My YouTube experience has told me, yes, you've got to a certain point where the viewers will be happy now. We've got to a nice conclusion. So I'm going to switch off. So if you could just say bye to everybody who's watching. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.